Today, I'm going to show you how to transform these three images into a magical fantasy world with this photo composite tutorial for GIMP in 7 easy steps. Download the images via the links in the description below, open up this image, and let's do it. So step number 1 is going to be resizing the canvas and removing the sky. So let's start off by going up to Image and selecting Canvas Size. And I want to make the height 1000 pixels taller. So we're going to type in 5044, click your tab key, come over to the new canvas preview area and drag the image down and resize. Now to remove the sky, we need to make a selection of it, and we're going to use the fuzzy select tool to do that. You can grab it from the toolbar or with the keyboard shortcut, which is the letter U. Now in the tool options, I have the threshold set to around 12 and the draw mask turned on, which is what I recommend doing because it's going to give you a visual of what's being selected. So I'm going to click up here and drag down, and the pink overlay represents what's being selected. And I'm going to continue dragging down to try and select as much of the sky as possible in between each of those blades of grass. Now, if you go down too far, you will begin selecting our main subject in the middle there, and it looks like I have part of her shoulder selected. That's fine because it's an easy fix to remedy, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here so I can continue adding to my selection. Now I need to go back to my fuzzy select tool. I'm going to hold down my shift key and click inside to add to the selection. I also need to do this side, and then if you want, you can navigate around the edge of the grass here to see if you can add any more to it. So hold down your spacebar key. That will give you a hand tool temporarily, and then you can click and drag around your image. It looks like that's the best I could do with this tool. So we're gonna go ahead and apply our mask next, and then I'll show you how to clean this up. So let's add a layer mask based on the selection. Once you click add, it should remove the sky, but it doesn't. It did the opposite. That's okay though. We're going to go ahead and deselect with Command or Control, Shift plus A, or go up to Select and click on None from here. Now go to Colors and click on Invert to invert the colors of the layer mask, and now the sky is gone. So we're now going to paint with white to add back any part of the subject that was removed by accident. So we're going to grab our paintbrush tool with the letter P. I'm going to go with a larger size, and I have white set to the foreground. And now I can paint with white right here to bring back this part of our main subject. Now we're going to paint with black in order to remove the sky in between her hair and the blades of grass. So let me show you a little trick to do that. We're going to drop the size of the brush down here, a little bit smaller, and then we're going to go with a small amount of opacity of around 15 to 20, and we're going to click and drag multiple times with black to begin removing that slowly, which is going to help retain some of the fine detail in the hair and the blades of grass. So I'm not going to go through and do this for the entire image, otherwise you will be here all day. But now that you know how to clean up the edges of your grass here and in between the blades, go ahead and spend a little bit more time on doing that. I do see a little bit of a mistake here on this arm. It looks like I didn't select all of the arm. So I'm going to go back to white and 100 for the opacity so I can bring that back in right here. Actually, it might be a piece of grass, I'm not sure, but you can always clean this up later on as well if you haven't gone too far, and make adjustments to the layer mask as needed. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and clean up this part of the arm because we have a little bit of a white outline. Actually, I think you get the idea. So let's go ahead and move on to step number 2, which is adding the stars. So let's go ahead and find the files that we downloaded. We're going to grab this file here and drag and drop over the canvas to add it as a new layer. Now, if that doesn't work for you, go up to File and select Open as Layers to add it that way. So it's rotated the wrong way, so I'm going to go ahead and grab my rotation tool with Shift plus R. That's going to activate the rotation tool, and then I can come up here and type in 90 plus the tab key to rotate it. I'm going to click Rotate. All right, I need to move this up now and also move it below this layer here. So let's move it below, grab your move tool and move it up into position wherever you want it. So now I can definitely see the sky coming through with that new background in between the different blades of grass here. So I would definitely go in and spend some time on cleaning that up. But since you know how to do that, I don't need to show you how to do it. All right, we're now going to change the colors of this star background. Let's go ahead and rename this layer stars. And the blue is pretty cool, but I want a more purplish type of color, which is more of a fantasy type color. At least that's the color I like. You can do whatever color you like. I'm going to go up to colors, hue, saturation, and I'm going to adjust the hue to the right here to get the purple color. So I don't know, what do you think? I'm going to go with something like that. So then the next thing I want to do is I want to tone down the brightness of the stars themselves, not the entire layer, mainly the stars, so the whites and the highlights. And we can do that by going to our levels tool and adjusting the output. So if we drag this to the left, it's going to begin reducing the tonal range in the image, and it's going to make it darker. I don't want to go too far because I don't want it too dark, at least not for this layer. So I'm not quite sure what I want. Maybe right around 200. Actually, I think that looks pretty good. What do you think? All right, so now that that's toned down, let's go ahead and click OK. And here's an optional tip if you want to do something different, more creative. Go up to Filters, Blur, and select Circular Motion Blur, and that's going to create a star trail. Now you can adjust the center of it via the Y and the X axis here, and you can also change the angle. But I find that the result is not as good as the default setting. So for me, I would leave it at the defaults, but go ahead and play around with it to see what kind of effects you can get with those different adjustments. I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of that. The other thing I would recommend doing is duplicating your star layer here before applying that circular motion. That way, if you decide you don't like it later on, you can go ahead and turn that layer off or delete it. All right, so step 3 is all about our moons. So let's go ahead and grab our moon file here and add it to our composite. Let's go ahead and move it up just a little bit and remove all this blackness with our fuzzy select tool. We're going to add a selection here, and we're going to invert the mask from here versus doing it in the menu. Let's go ahead and deselect, and let's go ahead and right click and apply that layer mask since we don't need it anymore. And we're going to go ahead and move this moon over here to the left so it's off center. Now, I don't know about you, but 2 moons I think would be better than 1. So I'm going to create 2 moons. But before I do that, I want to make some adjustments to this particular moon to make it more dramatic, more lively. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and double click right here and call this Moon 1. And I'm going to duplicate this layer and call it Moon Contrast because we're going to add some contrast. Now, if you've ever watched any of my tutorials, you know that I like to use the S curve via the curves tool, but we're not going to do that. We're going to use brightness contrast, and I'm going to increase the contrast by around 30 to 40. I'm going to go actually 35, I think would be pretty good. So let's do that. Let's go ahead and duplicate this layer, and I'm going to call this Moon Levels Output so we can reduce the tonal values and make it darker. And that's going to help create some depth between our main subject and the moon. So let's go up to levels again by going to colors, levels, and then we're going to drop the output down to around 100 to 120, whatever you think looks good. I'm going to do right there. And now we're going to apply a white layer mask so we can create a crescent shape. So I don't want a full moon or a half moon. I want maybe a quarter moon or whatever you want to do. So select white and make sure you click on invert mask so it's not inverted. Once you click add, you can then paint with black. So let's set that to the foreground color. We're going to grab our paintbrush tool, and then with a fairly large brush and the hardness set to around 50, you can paint with black to add that crescent shape. How cool is that? I love it. And of course, you can go in and paint with white to reshape that crescent if needed. So go ahead and create that crescent shape based on however big you want that shape to be. And now that you have that done, we're going to create a new group layer. We're going to call this the Moon Group. And we're going to place each one of these moon layers inside. All right, let's go ahead and collapse this and duplicate this. Right click and merge the layer group. All right, I'm going to call this Moon 2. And let's grab our move tool and move it over. All right, so it's a little bit too big. I don't want it that big. I want it to be smaller and further away from this moon. And we're going to adjust the contrast to give the illusion that it is further away. So we can grab our scale tool with Shift plus S to activate it, and then we can make it smaller. Click in the center here to move it over. The other thing I want to do is I want to rotate it because I think it's closer to the sun as well, which is probably down and around over here. So I'm going to change the angle of it as well with the rotate tool. So Shift plus R to activate, then click and drag and rotate. All right, once you're happy, click enter or return. And now we need to adjust the output levels of the tonal range like we've done before. First, let's go ahead and duplicate this and call it Moon 2 Levels Output. And then we're going to go up to Colors Levels and drop the output value. Actually, we need to go with black and reduce the black tonal values. So we're reducing the blacks and some of the shadows. And by lowering the contrast, it gives that illusion that it is further away. So let's take a look at the before and the after. So that looks pretty good to me. All right, in step 4 is the beginning of the conversion from day to night for the foreground. So let's rename this layer Original. Let's duplicate it and name it Levels Output, since that's the tool we're going to use for the conversion. We're going to go up to Colors and select Levels again, and we're going to adjust the whites and the highlights down to around 150 or so. We're now going to begin building some depth into the image by adding some highlights into the grass. So grab your layer mask, set the black to the foreground color, grab your paintbrush tool with a fairly large brush, and drop your opacity down so you can build up that highlighted area gradually to create a more seamless transition from light to dark. So I'm going to go ahead and just click in a few different areas here, and we'll overlap those brush strokes to build it up gradually. And again, it will be more seamless this way. And if your opacity is too low, and if you want to do it a little bit faster, like I kind of do right now, I'm going to go ahead and increase the opacity. And again, that will add more depth as well by alternating your opacity settings so you're not adding the same amount every time. So as you can see, the more I do this, the more depth I'm creating by creating highlighted areas of different variations and different levels in different parts of the image. All right, so step 5 is adding a color tone in the foreground so we can get the color of light from the stars, or at least the sky, into the foreground to help the color matching of the composite. So let's go ahead and create a new layer called Color, filled with transparency, and we're going to go ahead and select a color here with our foreground select tool, and I'm going to choose this bright purple right here. And then we're going to grab our bucket fill tool and fill it in. Now I only want this color to be in the foreground, and we're going to copy this layer mask and place it on this color layer. But first, we're going to change the blending mode to vivid light. All right, so that's pretty intense. So let's go ahead and drop the opacity down a little bit. And then once we mask it, it will look much better. So let's go ahead and do that. Grab your layer mask, right click, click on Mask to Selection. Grab your color layer, add a layer mask based on the selection, and click Add, and that will remove it from the sky. Go ahead and deselect with Command or Control, Shift plus A. Now our highlighting is a little bit too intense for me, so I may want to drop the opacity of this layer down some more, and I can also use my layer mask to continue adjusting the highlights as needed. But I think as the more I drop this opacity, the more it's blending in, and we're still retaining some of that color tone in the overall image. So I think I'm going to go with that right now. All right, so step number 6 is doing a little bit more styling. what we're going to do is merge all the layers into a new layer. So we're going to right click and select new from visible. And now all of those layers have been combined into one. So I'm going to call this the matte effect because that's what I want to do, is apply a matte effect. It's going to reduce the overall saturation and add a little bit of matting to the overall image. So let's go up to colors and select our curves tool. I'm going to bring the blacks and shadows down just a little bit to add an anchor point there. And then I'm going to grab my black point here and drag it up to create that matting effect. So this is optional based on your creative vision, and you can do as much or as little as you like, again, based on what you think looks good. I'm going to go ahead and go with that. All right, so the other thing I want to do before we move on is I want to sharpen the overall image. So let's duplicate this layer and let's call it sharpen. And let's go up to filters, enhance, and select high pass. This is going to convert it to grayscale, which is going to make it easier to see where that sharpening is being applied, which is along the edges of the different elements in the layer. We can increase the amount of sharpening by increasing the contrast, and then we can increase the radius by adjusting the standard deviation. That's too much, so I'm going to go ahead and reset that and increase the contrast to right about there. That looks pretty good. Now, if you want to see this in color, you can actually do that by adjusting the blending option here to overlay. But I don't recommend applying this directly to the layer. Instead, I recommend using the replace with the grayscale, and that's going to give you more flexibility by adjusting the blending mode to something else later on if you want to. Now I want to remove that sharpening from the sky, and we need to do that by copying this layer mask again and applying it to that sharpening layer. So we're going to right click, mask to selection, back up here, add a selection layer mask and apply it. And that removed the sharpening from the sky. Let's go ahead and deselect. And what I want to do now is I want to apply that sharpening to just the moons. So we're going to go ahead and paint with white on the moons. And then that will bring some of that sharpening back, maybe not as much. So I'm going to drop the opacity down and use a larger brush for the first one. So it's real subtle, but it's a lot sharper than it was before. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the second moon. All right, in step 7, we are going to do some final tweaks to enhance our final artwork. So let's go ahead and create a new layer from all visible layers. And let's call this tweaks. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in because what I want to do is target our main subject here. I think she's too dark, so I want to brighten her up, and we're going to do that with our curves tool. So I'm going to drag the midtones and the highlights here up to the right to brighten her up, and we may need to bring the shadows down just a little bit to add some contrast. Now we have some mistakes in here, and that's because I rushed this edit and it's not perfect. So you're going to spend a little more time on your masking to make sure you're not getting these types of anomalies along her arm and her hair and in the grass. Anyways, let's go ahead and click OK. And again, that's applied to the entire image, but we want to target just the main subject. So this time, what we're going to do is apply a black layer mask, and black is going to hide all the pixel edits that we did to the layer. And then we can paint with white to bring it back. I'm going to increase my opacity, and then as I paint on her, it will begin brightening up just her and nothing else. How cool is that? I love it. All right, to continue elevating your GIMP editing skills, make sure to subscribe and check out that playlist for more compositing tutorials.